the CEO of a large car dealership chain, one of the few women to succeed in a male-dominated industry. But after a long vacation, she decides to return not as the boss but undercover in old clothes, without makeup, posing as an ordinary customer to see how her staff really behaves. A few minutes after entering the flagship salon, she hears laughter behind her back, rudeness, and prejudice. One of the managers says bluntly, "Madam, this is not a place to browse. You buy here, you don't choose." But they don't know who is standing in front of them. After an exhausting yet rejuvenating extended vacation that had taken her far from the constant pressures and regulatory battles of the automotive industry, Adrienne Crawford, CEO of Crawford Autos, one of the nation's premier car dealership networks, found herself grappling with a question that had long nagged at her. In a domain dominated by aggressive sales tactics, competitive self-interest, and a legacy of entrenched male dominance, she had always prided herself not only on breaking glass ceilings but also on knowing every detail of her company's operations. However, over the years, as her schedule became increasingly cluttered by big-picture strategies and boardroom politics, the true nature of everyday customer experience almost faded into utter obscurity. Determined to rediscover the raw truth of her organization, Adrienne made a bold decision. She would return to her flagship showroom, undercover, incognito, and unadorned. Leaving behind her signature power suits, perfectly coiffed hair, and meticulously applied makeup, Adrienne chose instead the humble guise of an everyday car buyer. Clad in loose, faded jeans, an oversized sweatshirt, and a battered pair of sneakers, she was unrecognizable to the well-versed insiders of her own empire. No name badge, no glittering corporate aura, just an ordinary woman wandering into a place where, until that moment, she had been unquestioningly revered as the boss. For Adrienne, this was more than a mere experiment. It was a quest for authenticity, to witness firsthand whether loyalty, respect, and professionalism still defined the company she had built. Arriving at the sprawling, glass-fronted showroom early on a crisp, unassuming morning, Adrienne stepped through the automatic doors with a measured, steady gait. The scent of polished metal, new leather, and a hint of motor oil greeted her, a familiar perfume that evoked both pride and nostalgia. The showroom, brilliantly lit and meticulously organized, bore every mark of high standards. Yet beneath the gleaming surfaces and glossy brochures lurked the everyday interactions between sales staff and customers. Interactions that, Adrienne feared, might have strayed from her core values over time. Almost immediately, as she moved through the expansive, modern space with an air of quiet determination, Adrienne detected subtle cues that set her heart racing. Not long after she had taken her first tentative steps among the rows of the latest models, she began to hear whispers and furtive laughter echoing from behind corner offices and near the service desks. The snide, dismissive chuckles seemed aimed at the figure of the lady in plain clothes, a figure so starkly out of place amidst the meticulously trimmed image of corporate excellence that it was impossible to ignore. A middle-aged manager, standing behind a gleaming reception counter, leaned over to a junior colleague and murmured, almost imperceptibly, "Madam, this isn't a place for window shopping. You're here to buy, not to choose." His sneering tone, laced with condescension and disbelief, stung like a physical blow. The remark was not meant for any ordinary customer. It carried the implicit assumption that someone like her, a woman whose appearance suggested she might be from the lower echelons of society, had no right to demand the company's full respect. Adrienne's mind raced with a cacophony of thoughts. This was exactly the kind of behavior she had dreaded might fester beneath the surface in the absence of her direct oversight. It wasn't enough for a corporation to have pristine facilities and high-profile leadership. The true measure of success lay in the everyday treatment of every customer, regardless of appearance, wealth, or background. Carefully, she adjusted her posture, deciding that silence might be the best ally for now. Instead of revealing her true identity, she began to engage subtly. She walked slowly among the displays, asked a series of seemingly innocent questions about financing options, and even commented on the color and design of the latest sports model. Yet, with each interaction, Adrienne noted the dismissive looks and barely concealed irritations that her queries provoked among the staff. In the midst of a quiet conversation with a floor sales associate, one of the few who treated her with genuine courtesy and did not allow their tone to betray any form of prejudice, Adrienne's well-honed instincts registered more than routine indifference. The associate's eyes briefly betrayed a flicker of discomfort as she struggled to reconcile Adrienne's unassuming appearance with the persona of the corporate titan she might have once served. The exchange, though laden with polite smiles, hinted at an undercurrent of bias. While one or two of her questions were met with standard sales pitches, others seemed to be brushed off or answered with an air of condescension. Every so often, Adrienne noticed smirks among the managerial staff or dismissive gestures meant to silence her inquiries. It was as if the very heartbeat of the dealership, hidden behind layers of corporate gloss, revealed something far less admirable than its public image suggested. For Adrienne, this undercover mission was a trial by fire. Each step further into the showroom was accompanied by meticulous mental notes of understaffed counters, curt dismissals, and the dissonance between the sparkling advertisements and the actual treatment of a regular customer. The initial irritation she felt on hearing offhand remarks slowly gave way to a broader recognition that beneath the impressive facade of brand prestige and cutting-edge technology, there lurked an uncomfortable truth about attitudes towards women and perhaps even towards those who did not conform to a certain presumed economic status. Her heart pounded with a mix of indignation and determination. She was not there to merely criticize. She was there to learn, to understand where the cracks in her organization's foundation lay. Perhaps she would later call an emergency meeting, revise policies, or even implement diversity training programs. But for now, she required additional evidence, a complete picture of how every staff member behaved when no one was around to remind them of corporate decorum. As the minutes turned to an hour, Adrienne moved through different sections of the dealership. In the service center, she observed mechanics and administrative personnel engaging in rough banter that bordered on discriminatory stereotypes. In the finance office, she noticed that her questions about rates were met with curt answers and a lack of any warmth that one expected from a brand that prided itself on high customer satisfaction scores. The discrepancies weighed on her. Each moment was a testament to a systemic issue that had quietly festered in the absence of her watchful eye. She took extensive mental notes, recording the seeming favoritism toward customers who were perceived as affluent and the patronizing barriers imposed on those who resembled her present disguise. By the time Adrienne finally left the showroom, with her questions unanswered, her suspicions confirmed, and her resolve hardened, her mind was a swirling storm of insight and planning. The journey had just begun. She realized that the forthcoming confrontation would be a watershed moment for her organization. Unbeknownst to the dealership staff, they had been unwitting participants in an experiment that would soon force a reckoning with their own biases and attitudes. Leaving the building without a trace of her corporate identity, Adrienne walked back to her parked car with a quiet determination. Her heart was heavy with disappointment for what she had witnessed, but was also fueled by the hope that change was possible. Behind every dismissive smile and every offhand snicker, there was a chance for her to reshape the corporate culture into one that embodied respect, fairness, and genuine customer care. And so, in that very moment, Adrienne Crawford silently vowed that while she might return tomorrow as the unassuming customer, by the close of this investigation, every contract, every policy in her organization would be rewritten to ensure that dignity always triumphs over arrogance. As Adrienne left the front entrance of the dealership's flagship showroom, the imposing double doors slid shut behind her with an automatic, indifferent hiss. Inside, the showroom emanated a pristine brilliance. Gleaming rows of polished cars lined up in perfect symmetry, high-end leather chairs, and decorative plant arrangements that lent an air of corporate sophistication. Yet for all its modern splendor, what unfolded in those spacious halls was far removed from the lofty image showcased in glossy brochures. Moving at a deliberate, measured pace, Adrienne, disguised in her unassuming casual attire, strolled past the display cases with practiced detachment. She blended into the background, careful not to draw attention to her unremarkable features under the dim light of her low-budget ensemble. Her eyes, however, roved keenly over every nuance of the staff's demeanors, every hushed exchange and subtle sway of condescension. Within minutes of her entrance, the atmosphere began to reveal its true colors. From behind a polished reception desk, a middle-aged manager with a stern beard and a pair of half-rimmed glasses glanced up and muttered to his colleague. His voice a mere whisper but laced with unmistakable disdain. "Madam, this isn't a place for leisurely browsing. Here, people come to buy, not just to window shop." The comment, spoken with a dry chuckle that barely concealed his contempt, was meant for a customer he assumed was unaware of any higher expectation than that of a routine visitor. Adrian felt a sting of irritation even as she maintained the calm of an ordinary shopper. As she continued her unobtrusive journey through the showroom, Adrian's presence was largely ignored. When she asked for information at one of the high-tech kiosks, the sales associate barely managed a perfunctory greeting. The young man's eyes betrayed a fleeting look of annoyance at having to explain features that he assumed someone of her apparent social standing would already know. "Our latest model offers a suite of advanced safety features and cutting-edge entertainment options," he droned mechanically, not meeting her eyes, as if addressing an invisible mass of disinterested customers. His tone was flat, laden with the kind of impersonal efficiency that was routine in environments where higher-priced merchandise was sold with automatic assumptions of superiority. Navigating further down the expansive hall, Adrian paused near the premium section reserved for luxury models. Here, the air felt just a bit different, more polished, as if the very essence of affluence were preserved in each meticulously arranged display. Yet, she noticed that even here, subtle snickers and pointed glances surfaced. A pair of well-dressed managers, standing close to a sleek sports coupe, exchanged quick, barely audible remarks. One leaned toward the other, his voice low but audible enough to catch Adrienne's attention. "Is it really her?" Again with that look, dressed like she didn't know her worth. The insinuation, dripping with condescension, made her pulse flutter with quiet indignation. Their hazel eyes, filled with a mixture of incredulity and superiority, confirmed what Adrian had long suspected. Her real status as the powerful CEO was a secret they were blissfully unaware of, but also a fact that starkly contrasted with their dismissive attitude toward the customer before them. In the midst of all this, not every interaction was snide. One young trainee, a fresh face in an impeccably neat uniform, greeted her with a friendly smile and engaged her in a genuine conversation about financing options. His politeness, warm yet unassuming, was a stark exception in an environment otherwise marred by dismissive attitudes. Yet even his sincerity seemed overshadowed by the pervasive air of entitlement that the others exuded. Adrienne's every step was coupled with an acute observation of office chatter from behind glass-partitioned managerial offices. Murmurs of gossip, riding on whispers, hinted at assumptions made on the basis of appearance. A senior sales manager, his voice edged with disbelief, was overheard remarking, "Who would come in like that? Probably someone who can't even afford one of our premium models." Although such comments were hushed enough not to be heard by every ear in the showroom, Adrienne's sensitive, trained attention captured every nuance. It was as if the showroom itself was a stage, and the staff were performing a role written in ignorance and hubris, a role that, in their minds, validated a sales hierarchy where customers were neatly categorized based solely on appearances. Adrian, in that moment, felt an unexpected mix of disappointment and determination. Each dismissive sneer, each careless remark, underscored truths she had long feared might have infiltrated even the most sophisticated corners of her expansive empire. As she glanced around discreetly, every subtle, unfriendly gesture was catalogued in her mind, proof that beneath the well-practiced veneer of polished customer service, an undercurrent of bias still reigned. The contrast between the showroom's shiny exterior and the bruised interactions within was starkly clear to her, igniting in her a quiet resolve. This undercover mission, which initially had the taste of an experiment born out of curiosity, was rapidly evolving into an urgent call for change. The feedback was not merely about customer preferences. It was about respect, decency, and the fundamental values that she had always believed her brand should embody. By the time she reached the exit, her questioning satisfied with enough evidence to warrant serious internal reflection. Adrian had silently vowed that no matter her corporate persona outside these walls, she could not allow this behavior to persist. The next steps of her investigation were already forming in her mind. With careful discretion, she would gather the rest of her observations, document each incident, and prepare for the transformative confrontation that would eventually shake the very foundations of her automotive empire. And as she slipped back into her unremarkable car, leaving behind the echoing footsteps and haughty glances of the showroom, she carried with her the undeniable sense that the real work was just beginning. Adrienne's undercover journey deep into the heart of her flagship dealership continued as she moved from one section of the sprawling showroom to another. Determined to understand the true nature of the customer experience provided by her staff, she began interacting more directly with the employees, a test that would reveal the subtle, and not so subtle, layers of condescension and indifference that had embedded themselves in the service culture. Her first stop was at a polished information kiosk near the front of the showroom. Approaching a young salesperson who was tidily dressed in a standard uniform, she asked a seemingly simple question about the financing options for a mid-range sedan. The young man, whose eyes briefly widened in feigned surprise at her appearance, responded with an overly rehearsed pitch that barely masked his annoyance. "Ma'am, if you're interested, we offer financing plans that cater to immediate purchasers. This is not the time for prolonged consultation. Most of our customers here are ready to drive off today," he said curtly, his tone clipped and dismissive. Feeling a prickle of indignation but determined to maintain her in-character disguise, Adrienne pressed for further details. "I'd like to know more about the interest rates and the terms. Perhaps even schedule a test drive?" she inquired, her voice steady. The salesperson responded with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Ma'am, if you can't decide quickly, you might want to come back when you're ready. We're very busy here." His impolite remark hung in the air like an unbidden insult. Adrienne's heart sank momentarily, not just for the slight but for what it revealed. A mindset that equated earnest inquiry with weakness. Not long after this terse exchange, Adrienne made her way deeper into the showroom to inspect one of the luxury models featured in a prominent display. Here, a group of managers was gathered near the high-end convertible, huddled in animated conversation. As she approached to ask a few technical questions about the vehicle's performance, one manager, the one whose earlier disgruntled whisper had mentioned window shopping, cast a piercing glance in her direction. Leaning in conspiratorially to his colleague, he whispered just audibly enough for Adrienne to catch. "Is this really the same lady who was in those rubber boots and that threadbare jacket? It's hard to imagine she'd have the means to actually buy a car of this caliber." His tone dripped with sarcasm, betraying a deeply ingrained prejudice that was as masked as it was blatant. Before Adrienne could even respond, the manager's tone shifted as he addressed her directly in a patronizing manner. "Ma'am, if you're interested in our premium selection, might I suggest you focus on models that suit someone with your budget constraints," he remarked, his words punctuated by a dismissive smirk. Shock and humiliation washed over her, not because the comment was made in front of everyone, though many nearby turned their heads with barely concealed amusement, but because it struck at the very core of her identity as a sophisticated, successful CEO in disguise. Attempts to salvage the situation only compounded the discomfort. At the service counter, when Adrienne requested an explanation of the dealership's latest trade-in policies, a seasoned service manager answered in a tone that was so curt it bordered on rudeness. "We don't have time for lengthy explanations. If you're not serious about buying, you might as well leave," he stated flatly, his eyes inadvertently rolling as if to underscore his contempt for what he assumed was a frivolous inquiry from someone he deemed unworthy of respect. Throughout these encounters, Adrienne noted meticulously every dismissive tone, every sarcastic remark, every condescending gesture. She observed that while some employees might be unaware of the explicit prejudices permeating their behavior, others seemed to delight in the opportunity to demean a customer who did not fit the stereotypical image of a high-spending client. Yet amidst the cascade of snide comments and brazen indifference, one act of genuine human empathy managed to pierce the dark cloud of arrogance. While waiting near the finance bureau with impatience mounting from numerous unanswered questions at her side, Adrienne encountered a young trainee. His presence was unassuming, with a slight hesitation in his voice that marked him as inexperienced. Yet his eyes shone with sincere concern when she approached him. "Excuse me, ma'am, he said with a gentle smile. "Would you mind if I help you with your inquiries? I don't think you've been attended to properly, and I want to ensure that you have all the details you need." His tone was free of the sneers or mockery that had marred her previous interactions. Instead, it exuded a warmth that suggested he cared about the integrity of the customer experience. Adrienne's heart lifted at his courteous demeanor. Here was someone who still believed in serving with respect and dignity, even if his position did not grant him the authority to change entrenched policies. Yet even as the trainee's kindness offered a stark contrast to the broader atmosphere, the sting of cumulative derogatory remarks weighed on her. In one particularly distressing moment, while browsing near the compact car section, she overheard two sales assistants whisper together. Their words were low but laden with contempt. "Did you see her? She looks like she just walked off the street, not into a dealership. Who would take her seriously?" The comment, drifting on the echo of dismissive laughter, made Adrienne's pulse race with indignation and disbelief. Every remark, every dismissive glance, was not merely an offhand comment. It was a reflection of a deeper, systemic problem within the culture of her own brand. By the time her hour-long undercover excursion drew to a close, Adrienne had gathered a wealth of observations that painted a troubling picture. The interactions throughout the dealership were punctuated by unprofessional behavior and ingrained biases that worked insidiously to undermine the reputation and potential of the organization. As she stepped out of the showroom into the cool embrace of the afternoon, the sound of hushed ridicule and the memory of condescending voices trailed after her like unwelcome specters. In silence, Adrienne resolved that this was not merely an isolated instance of impolite behavior. It was a symptom of a broader cultural malaise, a deep-rooted issue that needed addressing if her dealership was to truly embody the values of fairness, respect, and customer-centered service. With renewed determination burning within her, she understood that the forthcoming confrontation with her staff would be as much about instilling a sense of shared dignity as it would be about reshaping company policy. The evidence of these interactions would soon demand a full internal review, accountability for those whose actions diminished the customer experience, and ultimately, a restructuring of the very ethos of the sales floor. After a long, disheartening hour in the showroom, during which every interaction had confirmed her worst fears about the ingrained arrogance and dismissive attitude of her staff, Adrienne knew it was time to end her undercover experiment for the day. Without overt fanfare or dramatic declarations, she silently gathered her thoughts. Her expression remained calm and impassive, masking the storm of disappointment and indignation churning within her. There was no protest, no confrontation for that moment. She would simply leave, taking her unidentifiable persona with her. As she strolled slowly towards the exit, her unassuming presence merging with the throng of everyday customers, the subtle microcosm of the dealership revealed its true colors. Conversations came in hushed, conspiratorial tones among the staff. Behind the pristine reception desk and along the gleaming corridors of the showroom, a group of managers and sales assistants exchanged knowing glances and snide remarks. Their laughter, low and dismissive, filtered through the space like a bitter wind. In one quiet moment near the exit, Adrienne's departure did not go unnoticed to those whose judgment was clouded by puffed-up entitlement. A mid-level manager, leaning casually against a glass partition that overlooked the customer area, caught sight of her receding figure. In a barely audible whisper that carried a mix of incredulity and amusement, he remarked to his colleague, "Is that the same person who came in yesterday wearing those ridiculous rubber boots? I swear she looked like she was practically homeless." The comment, meant to be humorous in its cynicism, drew a smattering of suppressed chuckles from nearby staff. They exchanged amused looks, hushed laughter that did not require a microphone, a shared moment of mockery at a perceived oddity. Inside the showroom, as Adrienne passed by the luxury car displays and down polished aisles, a few sales assistants muttered similarly. One of them, huddled in a corner near the finance office, snickered under his breath, "Who comes into our flagship dealership dressed this way? Clearly, some desperate person who doesn't belong here." Others added their voices to the unkind chorus with gestures meant to punctuate their ridicule. Their amusement came not only from the unexpected appearance of a woman so plainly out of sync with the expected clientele, but also from an assumed narrative that she was unworthy of the showroom's opulence. Yet, throughout her silent exit, Adrienne absorbed every sneer, every whispered remark, and every condescending gesture with a steeled resolve. Her internal ledger of observations grew heavier with the evidence of disrespect and prejudice. There was a distinct irony in the scene. Here, within the walls of the establishment under her leadership, employees who had once been celebrated as the face of the brand had now revealed themselves to be steeped in biases and casual dismissiveness. As she neared the automatic revolving door, the smirks and mocking glances reached their zenith. One of the sales managers, still leaning casually against a counter, leaned in close to a newly hired trainee and said, "I wonder if she even knows how to drive a car. Maybe she's just here for a free ride." The trainee's nervous laugh failed to conceal his unease, but the comment elicited further muffled guffaws among those present. For Adrienne, however, this was not the time for a public rebuttal. She maintained her composure, her eyes set on the horizon beyond the glass doors, and walked out as if nothing untoward had transpired. With each step away from the neon brightness of the dealership, the murmurs of mockery grew fainter, replaced by the weight of her own quiet determination. She slid into her parked car with a measured grace that belied the fire in her heart, and drove away without turning back. In the aftermath of her departure, laughter erupted among several of the staff. Within the near-empty showroom and along its sterile corridors, a few employees chuckled as they recounted the day's events to one another. Their humor, however, was laced with arrogance, a misguided certainty that nothing significant was amiss, that the ordinary customer was simply a figure to be dismissed and ridiculed. They whispered speculations without pause. "I can't believe someone like her would even think of walking in here. And maybe she'll come back tomorrow in a different getup trying to test us again." Their banter was casual and unguarded, a stark contrast to the quiet solemnness that had characterized Adrienne's covert visit. Yet, beneath every laugh and dismissive remark lay the seeds of a reckoning. Adrienne's silent departure was not a retreat born of defeat but a deliberate act of observation, an archive of every insulting encounter that would soon be laid out as undeniable evidence of the company's internal decay. The ridicule she endured would soon transform into a catalyst for profound change. Although none in the showroom knew that the unpretentious customer who had just exited through the revolving door was, in fact, the very CEO of Crawford Autos, the reality of that fact would soon shatter the comfortable bubble of indifference that had taken root among them. Inside the empty lobby, long after Adrienne's taillights had faded into the distance, the echoes of laughter and casual cruelty mingled with a growing sense of impending accountability. Some employees dismissed the day as a trivial aberration, a minor disruption in an otherwise smooth operation, while others, perhaps already sensing that their hubris might have far-reaching consequences, exchanged uneasy looks. But for the most part, the cost of their derision was not yet measured, and the dealership continued its daily grind as if nothing had happened. Unbeknownst to them, however, Adrienne had safely documented every detail, every sneer, every whispered insult, and was already preparing her return. The quiet departure, marked by shallow laughter, would be immortalized as the moment when unchecked arrogance was exposed. And when the truth was finally unveiled, those who had mocked her would be forced to confront the deep repercussions of their dismissive behavior. In that silent, mocking laughter lay the promise of a coming storm of change, a reckoning that would remind them that dignity, when undermined, can no longer be ignored. An hour later, the polished glass doors of the flagship showroom slid open once more, but this time the brisk hush of the lobby was punctuated not by the casual clamor of everyday shoppers, but by a charged silence that spread like wildfire among the employees. Standing amid the rows of expensive vehicles and glossy brochures was Adrienne Crawford, no longer the inconspicuous customer who had blended into the background, but the unmistakable, impeccably attired CEO of Crawford Autos. In a sharply tailored business suit that radiated authority and determination, her every step exuded both the grace of a leader and the purpose of someone who had meticulously gathered truth behind an incognito guise. At once, the light chatter and whispered mockery that had filled the showroom when she first entered were replaced by stunned silence and wide-eyed disbelief. Whispers ricocheted off the pristine marble floors, Managers who had earlier sneered at her disheveled look now found themselves frozen in shock as her true identity was revealed by her poised, authoritative presence. It was a moment when the veneer of casual arrogance splintered, and every employee felt the piercing gaze of accountability. Without any dramatic flourish, Adrienne walked directly toward a raised platform at the center of the showroom. Behind her, a large flat-screen monitor was already displaying a live video call with the company's head office. Executives seated in a sleek boardroom looked on, serious and expectant, as Adrienne's bearing, confidence, and precision underscored that she meant business. The muted buzz of conversation gradually faded. Every eye was fixed on her. In that silent, heavy moment, the very essence of the dealership, the promised image of excellence and professionalism, was called into question. Adrienne's voice was calm but unwavering as she began to speak. "Good afternoon," she said clearly. "I believe that actions speak far louder than appearances, and today, I have come to address what I discovered during my recent visit to this showroom." Her tone was measured, not raised in anger, but imbued with a quiet authority that left no room for misinterpretation. "For the past hour, I have been a silent observer, a customer, one of many. But today I no longer disguise the truth. I stand before you as the Chief Executive Officer of Crawford Autos, the very person responsible for the policies and culture of this organization." At that precise moment, a hushed murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. The employees, many of whom had earlier exchanged derisive whispers, now exchanged nervous looks as they realized the magnitude of the situation. Adrienne continued, her words deliberate and incisive. "During my visit, I witnessed behaviors that run counter to the values that our company stands for. I saw dismissive jokes at the expense of customers, a lack of basic courtesy, and openly prejudiced comments that undermine the very dignity we claim to uphold. I have gathered evidence, a detailed and undeniable record of every interaction, every snide remark, every act of subtle hostility extended toward me, your customer, who came to experience what you believe is outstanding service." Her eyes swept over the assembled staff, some of whom began to shift uneasily, their expressions a mix of guilt and fear. "I do not come here today to berate you with loud accusations or public humiliation," Adrienne declared. "Instead, I stand before you to remind you that every customer deserves respect, regardless of how they appear, and that your behavior reflects upon all of us. Our reputation, built over years of hard work, rests on the dignity with which we treat every person who walks through our doors. Today, you have not just lost a customer, you have lost the trust and confidence of your leader." The room was so silent that even the hum of the air conditioning seemed too loud. As she spoke, the live video feed behind her provided incontrovertible evidence. Clips recorded earlier that day played on a continuous loop, showing snide smiles, dismissive gestures, and murmured insults captured by discreet security cameras. The footage was irrefutable proof of the degrading treatment and arrogance that had been tolerated, or even implicitly encouraged, within these walls. Palpable tension filled the air. One of the senior managers, who had earlier mocked her appearance, attempted to speak up, but his voice faltered as Adrienne's steady eyes met his. "I want you all to understand," she said, her voice taking on a tone that was as cold and explicit as tempered steel, "that I stand by the values we once proudly declared. Those who chose to treat any customer with disdain will face the consequences of their behavior. In my complete review of today's events, I have already begun making decisions that will redefine our internal policies." There was a collective intake of breath throughout the showroom. Adrienne then paused, letting her words sink in, before continuing. "This is not merely a disciplinary action. It is a call to rebuild the culture of respect and excellence that has always been the foundation of our brand. Today, you have witnessed the moment when the coupon of indifference was voided and replaced by an unwavering demand for dignity in every transaction. I will hold accountable every act of disrespect. You will see changes, terminations for those who have proven themselves unworthy of our values, a comprehensive audit of our customer service protocols, and mandatory training programs designed to ensure that every employee understands that our dealership serves not just a clientele, but a community." As she delivered these words, Shock cards flickered across the faces of the staff. Those who had once exchanged derisive glances now looked down in shame. A wave of regret seemed to wash over them as they realized that the facade they had so carelessly maintained could no longer hide their true natures. The pristine showroom, with its gleaming cars and luxurious displays, had become the stage on which their shortcomings were laid bare. Adrienne concluded her address with a final, penetrating statement. I did not come here merely to humiliate you. I came to remind you that each one of you plays a vital role in upholding the dignity of Crawford Autos. Today is a turning point. Let this be a lesson that respect is non-negotiable. You have lost more than just a customer today. You have lost a piece of the trust that binds us together. Reflect on that, and let it guide you toward becoming the professionals you promised to be. As her words ended, a heavy silence fell over the room, a silence that was punctuated only by the low, resounding thud of her footsteps as she stepped down from the platform and exited the showroom. The shock of her reappearance, combined with the undeniable evidence now on display and her calm but resolute declaration, marked a turning point that none in that room would soon forget. In the tense aftermath of her public address, Adrienne remained impassive, a portrait of calm authority, and motioned for the security team to bring up the recorded video footage on the centrally located display screen. There was no theatrical outburst, no frenzied shouting. Instead, with a measured tap on the remote, she began playing the montage of videos captured earlier in the day. The screen flickered to life, shifting through a series of candid, unguarded moments that had transpired throughout the showroom. The footage revealed everything. A close-up of a salesman's dismissive smirk as he answered a query with a curt, "Come back when you're ready?" The whispered mockery exchanged by a manager as he cast a derisive glance at a customer's attire, and the casually cruel comments overheard near the finance counter. The images, grainy yet unmistakable, displayed interactions where polite greetings had turned to sneers, and genuine inquiries were met with polluted indifference. Every instance was accompanied by ambient sound. The murmurs, the quiet laughter, even the palpable roll of eyes, all recorded without the interference of rehearsed responses. As the montage played on, a heavy silence befell the room. Managers, previously daring enough to chuckle and exchange smug looks during her undercover visit, now sat rigidly as if caught in the act. Some of the junior staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others avoided eye contact with the screen. Adrienne's voice, resonant and unwavering, began to speak over the images. These recordings do not lie. They are the unvarnished truth of what happens every day when our values are compromised by unchecked arrogance. I did not set out here to embarrass anyone. I went undercover to witness our customer service, and what I witnessed today is unacceptable. Every one of these moments represents a refusal to treat our customers with the dignity they rightfully deserve. Her tone carried neither ire nor theatrics. It was a factual narration that underscored the extent of disrespect permeating the dealership. On the screen, one clip made the hearts of many in the audience sink. A brief but telling moment of cruelty where a well-known senior salesperson had dismissed a customer with a callous remark about budget constraints, as if they were an insult to the brand itself. The sound of that statement echoed like a verdict. There are no excuses for this behavior, Adrienne continued, her gaze sweeping the room, penetrating even the most hardened faces. For too long, I have believed that our brand stood for excellence, not just in the quality of the vehicles we sell, but in the service and respect we offer each customer, regardless of their background or appearance. Today, you have not only failed to uphold that standard, but you have betrayed the trust that our clients, indeed, our community, expect from us. A weighted pause followed her words, during which the images on the screen continued to play silently in the background. In that charged silence, it was clear to every person in the showroom that the consequences of these actions would not be brushed aside. Adrienne's next sentences carried finality. Effective immediately, those individuals directly responsible for repeated acts of unprofessional conduct and discriminatory behavior will face termination. This is not a punitive measure born of personal vendetta. It is an essential step to reclaim the integrity of Crawford Autos and to rebuild the trust that has been eroded by indifferent arrogance. Her announcement sent a palpable ripple through the room. One by one, the names of the employees, Those whose recorded behavior had been flagged as intolerable were mentioned in the meeting minutes that Adrian produced on her tablet. The list included several middle management figures who had contributed to the toxic environment, as well as those on the sales floor who had been direct perpetrators of the dismissive and demeaning interactions. Faces drained of color. Even the few who had earlier maintained a brave front now looked defeated as reality sank in. A hushed murmur traveled through the listeners, mingling with an uncertain mix of regret, fear, and reluctant acceptance. In private, some employees exchanged glances that spoke of lessons learned too late, while others stammered apologies to those nearby, recognizing for the first time that their behavior had violated not only corporate policy but the very essence of decency. Adrian continued with clinical precision. Today's measures are only the beginning of a complete cultural reformation. A comprehensive audit and a full-fledged review of our customer service protocols will take place immediately. Our training programs will be overhauled to ensure that every employee, from the front desk to upper management, embodies the respect, empathy, and professionalism our brand promises. There was no dramatic outburst from Adrian, only the steady, unyielding tone of someone who had seen too much dishonor in her own domain and was determined to restore rightful pride. With a final, quiet statement, she said, "Let this video be a mirror reflecting the disparity between what we claim to be and what we truly are. I expect each of you to learn from this moment, to understand that our success is built not solely on the vehicles we sell, but on the integrity we show every day. This is your wake-up call." After she dismissed the assembled staff, Adrian left the showroom with the same measured stride that she had exhibited upon entering, though now the corridors were awash with a damp silence, the mind of every employee wrestling with what they had seen. In the days that followed, formal notifications and termination letters were issued to those found culpable. The reshuffling of roles and the immediate implementation of new training and operational protocols signaled that Crawford Autos was undergoing a corrective purge. While some employees tried to justify their behavior, the unassailable evidence and Adrienne's unvarnished words left little space for excuses. Outside the dealership, as the news of the executive's secret mission began to spread throughout the community, customers expressed a cautious optimism. Longtime patrons, especially those who had suffered the brunt of past neglect, found new hope that change was not only possible but imminent. In community forums, social media pages, and local news segments, discussions emerged not of scandal, but of the promise of transformation, a promise to restore dignity and honor where once there had been dismissal. The following morning, a quiet but unmistakable tremor of anticipation shrouded the flagship showroom. Overnight, the ripple effects of Adrienne's public reckoning had swept through Crawford Autos. The dealership's polished corridors now buzzed with a reluctant awareness that every smile, every dismissive remark, and every sneer had been held up to the harsh light of accountability. Today was not only about corrective measures, it was about setting a new tone, one that would redefine what it meant to serve customers with genuine respect and empathy. Before the opening of business, Adrian convened an unscheduled all-staff meeting in the main conference hall, a sleek, glass-walled space that overlooked the gleaming showroom floor. The atmosphere was markedly different from the unbridled indifference of the previous day. A palpable mix of apprehension and cautious hope filled the room, as employees sat rigidly at a long oval table. There, amid anxious murmurs, Adrian entered in full executive regalia. A sharply tailored suit, immaculate hair pulled back, and an expression that fused resoluteness with measured compassion. She began her address by summarizing the events of her undercover visit and the subsequent revelations. "Yesterday, I witnessed conduct that diminished the spirit and reputation of this organization," Adrian stated in a firm yet steady tone. "And I know that some of you now feel exposed by the mirror I held up to you. Today, however, we have an opportunity, not only to acknowledge our shortcomings but to rebuild our culture from the ground up." The CEO then recounted the evidence in clear, unambiguous language. The recorded dismissals, the subtle yet flagrantly demeaning comments, and the patently disrespectful behavior that had been captured on video. She displayed selected clips on the large projection screen, allowing everyone to watch the moments that had irrefutably betrayed the core values Crawford Autos once promised to uphold. As the images played, the sneers, the derisive whispers, and the offensive body language, The silence in the room was resonant. Even those who had scoffed just hours before now sat in semi-darkness, weighed down by the unmistakable evidence of their misdeeds. Then came the decisive moment. Adrienne's gaze softened as she shifted her tone. "I believe that accountability must be balanced with the possibility of growth," she said. "I have already taken the step necessary to remove those who have repeatedly weighed down our brand with their unprofessional conduct." She paused, and a few heads lowered in silent acknowledgement. "Let it be known that all individuals whose behaviors were documented today and that violate our principles of hospitality and respect have been terminated with immediate effect." A murmur of shock and, in some cases, relief echoed softly through the room. Yet Adrienne was not done. She continued, "But today is also a celebration of what can be when we choose to treat every customer with the dignity they deserve." At that moment, her eyes landed on the young trainee, one of the few who had approached her inquiry with genuine kindness and unfeigned politeness during her undercover visit. The trainee, whose sincere smile and earnest efforts had stood in stark contrast to the prevailing attitude of arrogance, was beckoned to stand. "As much as accountability is needed, I must also acknowledge those among you who have demonstrated the core values of our brand," Adrienne declared, her voice resonating with a quiet determination as she gestured toward him. "To those who have treated every customer, regardless of their appearance or perceived status, with respect and courtesy, you embody the spirit that Crawford Autos is meant to represent." Applause broke out among the assembly, not raucous, but measured, imbued with hope for reformation. Before the trainee could utter a word, Adrienne announced, "I am promoting you to Customer Relations Specialist. You will be a model for the new service culture I intend to instill in our organization." The room was stunned into silence by this announcement. For the trainee, the recognition was not only an individual triumph but a beacon confirming that integrity could indeed triumph over prejudice. Adrienne explained further that not only would the dealership be undergoing a comprehensive audit of its practices and its customer service protocols, but a series of mandatory sensitivity and diversity training sessions would be instituted across all locations. "We will partner with experts in diversity and inclusion to create a new framework for customer interactions, a framework where every person, regardless of the circumstances of their arrival, is treated with the equitable service they deserve," she added. The air in the room shifted as the announcement took hold. Even among those whose faces remained closed in remorse, there was now a sense that the old order was coming to an end. Many understood that while the corrective measures would be rigorous, they were necessary for the survival and integrity of the Crawford Autos brand. Adrienne's measured words had resonated on a profound level. This was not just an exercise in discipline but a sincere appeal to rebuild mutual respect, one interaction at a time. As the meeting drew to a close, Adrienne offered a final, solemn reminder. "Remember this day, not as a day of shame, but as the beginning of a new chapter built on accountability and dignity. The contracts you signed with this company are not merely business documents. They are commitments to a standard of excellence in service and humanity. If you fail to live up to that standard, you will always be reminded of the silence that follows when a customer's trust is broken." With that, she dismissed the assembled staff. In the echoing corridors of the showroom, a heavy silence descended. A silence that promised a future in which each employee would remember the day when a CEO, returning from vacation undercover, held in her hands not only their contracts but the very measure of their dignity. They laughed at her, yet she held their contracts firmly in her hands. And when she revealed who she truly was, a silence fell over the showroom that will never be forgotten. Subscribe if you believe that dignity always prevails over arrogance.